Everyday Therapist. I'm Dr. Deb, and with you, we will explore all sorts of different topics in the area of psychology from a clinical perspective to research perspectives, because that's what I'm interested in and that's what I've trained in. And so today we're going to continue on our discussion of trauma because it's a really large subject. And I hope you've seen some of my previous videos on it because this is a continuation. Now, I've talked about all sorts of different problems that occur when somebody has gone through trauma, and everyone has. As I've pointed out before, the first thing that happens to a child when it's born is it goes through a traumatic situation. Coming out of a birth canal or through a C-section, it's traumatic for a newborn. Now, in the past, I've talked again about all sorts of different situations, like dissociative situations and things like that. But I have yet to actually talk about post traumatic stress disorder and some of the other disorders that are really tied to it. Now, post traumatic stress disorder tends to be focused on the after effects of one event, and one cannot be diagnosed with PTSD until the event is, say, a month or more in the past. If a person is showing distress symptoms due to a traumatic event and it's been less than a month, then that has a different name. That is called adjustment disorder. And that's if it's been less than 3 months or so, and the person is showing the types of symptoms one would see with PTSD. Now, what are some of the some of the finer points about diagnosing somebody with post traumatic stress disorder? Well, first of all, a person has to have actually been involved in the traumatic situation or have the person may have seen it, observed it. Say, a child observing the parents being in a knockout, drag out fight, and that can affect the child. The child might start having different kinds of nightmares and things like that. But one caveat about all of this is you cannot give somebody a diagnosis of PTSD if the person only sees this kind of event um, through uh, visual media. So if, say, somebody saw the Twin Towers come down on 9/11 and developed symptoms from that, nightmares and things like that, that person cannot be diagnosed with PTSD. Now, so a therapist would give some other kind of diagnosis associated with trauma, but could not label that person as suffering from PTSD. That's just something that you should keep in consideration. And there have been discussions throughout the therapy community as to why there is this caveat. Um, the main thought is that the broadcast networks don't want to be sued for presenting uh, visuals that could cause somebody to suffer from PTSD. So, what are the symptoms of PTSD? I mean, we see presentations of it in TV shows and in movies and things like that, but what are the types of symptoms that can be pointed out as being post traumatic stress disorder? Well, first of all, they're the ones that we see all the times in movies, like flashbacks. Those are intrusive thoughts that sort of take over the person's thought process. Other intrusive thoughts include things like such as nightmares or bad dreams. Um, the dissociative reactions that I talked about last time are also considered to be potentially part of PTSD. The feeling of being not really a part of the event or feeling as though one is outside of oneself, those can also be symptoms of PTSD. Well, I have to check my notes so I don't miss anything. So bear with me. Also, another thing that can happen is there might be some cues in the environment that bring all those thoughts about the traumatic event back to the person. Say, for example, a person was in a car crash, and in that person's own car, there might have been, say, fuzzy dice hanging from the rear view window. anytime that individual sees fuzzy dice, that person might start to become anxious and begin to relive the event all over again. So those are, outside stimuli or cues that can evoke all of those thoughts and fears associated with the event. As I mentioned, flashbacks. Also, there can be some other types of changes, behavioral changes. People can become irritable. They have sleep problems. They may have uh, appetite problems with their appetite. They may be hyper vigilant, very reactive to things in their environments. You know, say somebody who has PTSD may have a really strong startle response when somebody comes up behind them. I know for myself, I tend to startle, but that's just me, not necessarily from PTSD. Also, people who have PTSD frequently become less interested in their outside activities because they tend to become more focused on the event. It sort of plays in their mind and they repeat it, trying to come up with scenarios where things could be different, um, or just thinking about how the event affected them. Um, in terms of hypervigilance, again, a person may change his or her behavior to do things such as leave the lights on in the house all the time, just because of expecting that would uh, dissolve anything that might come into the house, to dissolve the fear. So those are some of the aspects of PTSD, and they can occur in all sorts of traumatic situations. In fact, in the therapy community, there's a discussion that what is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is a very reduced view of what PTSD is because it does not take into account people who have been exposed to repeated traumatic situations. And so there's a move to have another type of PTSD added into the DSM, and it'd be called complex PTSD. And that would take into account people who, as I maybe have had repeated childhood abuse through, or people who have been through many traumatic situations. Because the current version of PTSD, as I said, is kind of focused on a one event situation. And many people have gone through multiple traumatic situations to uh, end up with the types of symptoms they have. Now, as I mentioned in the past, a lot of therapists who treat or work with people with trauma really have the view that many of the mental health issues that we see are really due to past trauma. And again, everyone has trauma. It's just how one perceives what has happened, the kinds of stories one gives oneself about what happened, and how the body responds to it. Now, in a future video, I will be addressing how we actually treat these kinds of traumas, whether it's using eye movement displacement and reprocessing, or talk therapy, or counting therapy. There are a whole wide range of ways that uh, these kinds of issues are addressed. And the goal of all that therapy is to get the person to come to a more helpful story about what happened and to work out some of the bodily aspects that might still be in there, eh, resulting from the trauma. Now, there's another kind of trauma that is also included in the same section of the DSM, and that has to do with grief. It's basically prolonged grief. That is a situation where someone has died and the person's death was at least a year before, and one or more people who were associated with that person are still intensely grieving to the point that the grief gets in the way of the person's ability to fully enjoy life. And uh, usually, somebody who is in a grieving situation, we don't, in terms of therapy, we don't really um, work with it too much right after the grief incident because we do need as humans, we do need to process what has happened in our lives, with the loss of somebody or a pet or whatever. We need to process the the loss. However, there may come a point where, again, that level of grief gets in the way of potentially taking care of oneself, um, finding joy again in one's life. And when it gets to that point in time, sometimes people will seek out therapy. And there are people who are truly trained in helping those who are in this extended grieving process. I've had a few clients who are like that, and it takes time, but with helping them see where they can find joy in their lives, whether it's children or grandchildren or uh, volunteering, it helps them move along past the event. So that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of trauma today. Next time, I'm going to talk about generational trauma and secrets. Because family secrets can often be the cause uh, family members to have experienced trauma because they don't know what's going on. They don't know why their family is the way it is. But before I leave, I usually want to give you some information about how to help with anxiety and things like that. And so today, I'm going to let you know that I like little tools. And um, there is a way to work with calming one's brain down, the chatter, etc. And it's using these, there are a range of these little devices. Uh, some are called, one brand is called Alpha-Stim, another one's, the company is Fisher Wallace. And what these little tools do is they run a little teeny current from one earlobe to the other earlobe, and it changes the brain waves a little bit. Somebody once told me this is like having electro, like ECT, electrotherapy, but it's so minor you can't even feel it unless you turn it up really high, and then it tingles your ears. But one device that I have, which is from Canada, it's called a Sota Biotumer. Now, the soda people don't know I'm showing you guys this is. So, but what it does is you flip it on your ears, little flippies. Flip it on your ears, and turn it on. Oops, I turned it too high. And it has multiple settings or modules, whether it's continuous or off on, and it will go for about 20 minutes. And after, after time, if you do this, say once a day for a couple of weeks, what I know in my experience and what others have reported is that the racing thoughts kind of disappear, and one feels more in tune with what's going on in the immediate time. So you're living in the present rather than in the future in your brain or in the past in your brain, but you're present at the moment. Um, Now, ones such as Alpha-Stim or the Fisher Wallace product, you actually have to get a prescription from a medical doctor to use it or a psychiatrist. Vitos, the Sota Biotuner is from Canada, and you can go on their website and look at all the specifications for it. And since it's from Canada, you don't need a prescription. Um, but it does work, or at least it has worked for me, and it has worked for other people who use such devices. For example, I had a client who was a professor, and she had really high anxiety due to trauma, and she had an Alpha-Stim, which had been prescribed by her psychiatrist, and she used it when she was grading papers because that way she could stay focused on the work she was having to do. When she wasn't using it and didn't use it for a week or so, then her racing thoughts would come back again. And so she found it to be a very useful kind of device. Now, there are several others of these sorts of things that I'll be sharing with you in the future. Some help you learn how to meditate. Others uh, let you select what level of what you want your brain waves to be doing. And I'll be talking about how brain waves are affected by our thoughts and by music and things like that. Sort of like that weightless song that I had, tune that I had you all uh, listen to or suggested you go listen to. But it's a similar sort of thing. So that's all I have for today. If you found this to be useful, please click the like button and turn on the notifications and subscribe. And if you know people who would find this information to be useful, please share it. Realize here trying to give you all information that you can use. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below and I will answer them the best I can. If anybody wants to do a live stream, I can figure out how to do that and then you can just ask me questions. So until the next time, take care. Thank you.